Hello and welcome to World News on the Papyrus Global TV. My name is Christiana Babayo, and here are the headlines. Amnesty sounds alarm, RSF committed war crimes in Darfur's El Fasher. UK Prime Minister calls for global pressure to stop slaughter in Sudan. Haitian official fires back at US visa sanctions, denies gang support. Trump administration orders mass review of refugees admitted under Biden. Kenyan civil society petitions International Criminal Court to probe alleged violations in Tanzania post-election violence. African and European leaders commit to boost trade, migration overhaul at Luanda summit. Vatican reaffirms commitment to monogamy as African bishops raise polygamy concerns. An urgent report by Amnesty International has formally accused the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces of committing war crimes in the Darfur capital, El Fasher, after its takeover of the city at the end of October 2025. The findings, released late November, alleged widespread atrocities, including mass executions, rape, hostage-taking for ransom, and the abandonment of hundreds of corpses across the city. According to the report, survivors, among them women and children, described brutal house-to-house raids, extrajudicial killings on armed men, and systematic sexual violence. One woman told investigators that she and her 14-year-old daughter were raped while fleeing the city. The girl later died in a clinic in the nearby township of Tawila. The attacks have triggered a massive displacement crisis, with thousands fleeing to refugee camps under grim conditions. Amnesty's Secretary General Anes Kalamad described the violence as persistent and widespread and said it likely constitutes not just war crimes but crimes against humanity under international law. She called for immediate international action, including criminal accountability, strict enforcement of embargoes, and suspension of any external support for the RSF. The RSF has yet to issue a formal response. However, tensions have escalated on the diplomatic front. The government of Sudan, through its envoy in Egypt, has urged the global community to designate RSF a terrorist organization and press for accountability. The situation remains extremely volatile. El Fasher, once a relatively stable hub in Darfur, now stands devastated, and humanitarian organizations warn that without swift intervention, the region faces the risk of even greater crises, including famine, disease outbreaks, further mass displacement, and deepening ethnic cleansing. In the face of mounting reports of mass atrocities in Darfur, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer, has issued a stark appeal to the international community, asking them to exert immediate global pressure to halt the violence and prevent further loss of civilian life in Sudan. The call comes as evidence from rights groups and humanitarian agencies reveal staggering human rights abuses linked to the RSF's seizure of key towns in the region. In an address to foreign ministers and international partners, the UK leader described the crisis in Sudan as a stain on our collective conscience, urging for coordinated diplomatic, economic, and humanitarian action. He emphasized that the ceasefire agreements and humanitarian corridors must be enforced and accused perpetrators of atrocities of facing eventual accountability under international law. While specifics of the UK's proposal remain under wraps, officials say London is pushing for expanded United Nations mandates, an arms embargo, and stronger protection for displaced civilians. The Prime Minister's stance has drawn attention to the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe. Besides documented killings and sexual violence, estimates suggest that tens of thousands have been killed and over 14 million people displaced nationwide since fighting reignited in 2023. Reaction to the UK's call has been mixed. Some foreign governments and human rights organizations welcomed the show of solidarity, calling it overdue. Others, including advocacy groups within Sudan, say global responses remain inadequate given the scale of suffering, accusing wealthy nations of political hesitancy and failing to hold external actors such as alleged arms suppliers accountable. As diplomatic pressure builds, the coming days will be critical. Humanitarian actors warn that the window to deliver urgent aid in Darfur and to prevent further ethnic cleansing and starvation is rapidly closing. The world may be at a crossroads between decisive action and catastrophic failure. A high-ranking member of Haiti's Transitional Presidential Council, Fritz Alphonse Jean, has publicly rejected recent U.S. visa sanctions that accused him of supporting criminal gangs, describing the accusations as politically motivated. On 25 November 2025, the U.S. State Department announced visa restrictions on an unnamed Haitian official, alleging that the individual has provided support to gangs and other criminal organizations, and obstructed law enforcement efforts to combat terrorist gangs. While the announcement did not name the person targeted, Jean confirmed on 26 November that he was the individual meant. In a press conference, he categorically denied the charges, asserting that they were a form of external pressure aimed at influencing internal Haitian politics. Jean explained that the sanctions came shortly after his name surfaced among those pushing for a change in Haiti's head of government. He claimed that he and several council members had received threats to desist from their reform agenda, including warnings of visa cancellation from US and Canadian diplomatic envoys. He further argued that his political critics were using gang violence as a pretext to stifle legitimate reform efforts, stating that he remains committed to fighting gangs' corruption and weapons proliferation. The sanctioning moves come at a delicate time for Haiti. The country is due to organize elections by February 7, 2026, when the nine-member Transitional Council mandate is set to end. But persistent gang-related violence, with gangs reportedly controlling 90% of the capital, has made elections condition increasingly uncertain. International reaction has been mixed. While some allies of the US administration support the sanctions as a means to curb gang influence, critics in Haiti have condemned them as external interference and a potential trigger for deeper political instability. We will now go on a short break, and when we come back, the news will continue. Stay tuned.
The Paparazzi Global, we don't just cover events, we create cinematic experiences. From red carpets to birthdays, gala dinners, and your fairy tale weddings, we bring your moments to life with high-tech precision. Our gadgets are smarter, our lenses sharper, and our team simply world-class. Trust the Paparazzi Global to tell your story in the boldest, brightest way possible.
Welcome back, and now the news will continue. The U.S. government has begun a sweeping review of nearly 200,000 refugees admitted during Joe Biden's presidency, raising deep concern and uncertainty within immigrant communities and other refugee rights advocates. A memo signed on 21 November 2025 by the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Joseph Edlow, argues that the prior administration placed too much emphasis on expediency and quantity at the expense of thorough vetting. As a result, the memo mandates a re-interview of all refugees admitted between 20 January 2021 and 20 February 2025 and potentially beyond. Under the directive, the agency has immediately suspended green card approvals for these refugees. Even individuals who have been granted permanent residency may now face re-evaluation. The memo states that if authorities determine a refugee should never have qualified, their status can be revoked, and that those flagged for removal may be placed in immigration court proceedings. The announcement has triggered alarm among refugee support organizations. Many of those who arrived under Biden had already undergone lengthy multi-stage vetting processes, some over several years before being resettled. Lincoln area resettlement agencies and legal groups are reportedly scrambling to provide advice and support to refugees now facing possible re-interviews and uncertainty over their immigration status. According to U.S. media reports, the policy also inclines towards a looming sharp restriction on future refugee admissions. The administration has reportedly proposed capping new refugee admissions to as few as 7,500 for the 2026 fiscal year, a significant drop from the 125,000 ceiling set under Biden. Refugee aid advocates decried the move as cruel and destabilizing, arguing that it undermines global humanitarian commitments and casts a shadow of insecurity over vulnerable populations, many of whom fled persecution, war, and grave human rights abuses. As the review proceeds, uncertainty looms over what happens to families, including children, who are expected to build permanent lives under protected status. Legal observers warn of costly litigation ahead and potential lasting damage to the credibility of U.S. refugee admission system. The coalition of Kenyan civil society groups has formally petitioned the International Criminal Court to investigate alleged human rights violation and state-backed violence in Tanzania following the disputed 2025 presidential election. The appeal was led by Kenya Human Rights Commission together with other rights and governance-oriented agencies. During a symbolic visit to the grave of late political leader Raila Odinga in Bondo, the coalition expressed deep skepticism over a reconciliation commission recently proposed by the Tanzanian government, calling it insufficient to deliver justice or credible accountability. According to KHRC's executive director, the proposed national mechanism cannot legitimately investigate alleged atrocities, especially those implicating senior officials, and risks becoming a whitewash. The groups insisted that the ICC as an independent international tribunal remains the only viable channel to guarantee impartial investigation and justice for victims. The petition highlighted reported incidents including extrajudicial killings, torture of detainees, enforced disappearances, and suppression of peaceful protests, all of which civil society says followed the polling period and the disputed result announcement. By calling on the ICC to take the case, Kenyan civil society actors are aiming to internationalize scrutiny of Tanzania's post-election violence, send a clear message about regional accountability standards, and press for transparent justice mechanisms beyond domestic processes. Observers note that such a move could escalate diplomatic pressure on Tanzania, especially if the ICC initiates a preliminary investigation. The Vatican has issued a new doctrinal note underscoring its commitment to monogamous marriage in response to the escalating concerns from African bishops about widespread polygamy among their congregations. Released on 25 November 2025 by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, the document titled One Flesh in Praise of Monogamy affirms marriage as an indissoluble, exclusive union between one man and one woman. It frames monogamy as not merely a tradition, but as a communion of love and life, upholding the dignity of both spouses and rejecting polygamy and polyamorous relationships. According to the Vatican, the note traces the concept of marital unity through biblical texts, Christian theology, and successive teachings of church councils and papal doctrines. While it does not deny the existence of polygamous and polyamorous practices, the note argues that these are fundamentally incompatible with the Christian understanding of marital charity, particularly when viewed through the lens of equal dignity, mutual gift, and lifelong commitment. The decision comes after repeated appeals from bishops across Africa who during recent synods had sought clear guidelines from the Holy See on how to approach the prevalence of polygamy in many African communities. In addressing those concerns, the Vatican also warned against polyamorous unions, increasingly recognized in parts of Europe and the West, suggesting that they, like polygamous, pose spiritual and moral risk by undermining the exclusivity and mutual belonging that underpin Christian marriage. Importantly, the decree does not attempt to criminalize existing polygamous unions among Christians. Rather, it directs clergy to emphasize pastoral accompaniment, catechesis, and education about the theology meaning of monogamy. In doing so, the Church seeks to balance doctrinal fidelity with compassion, acknowledging the cultural, social, and economic complexities faced by many believers. The affirmation is likely to end the debate, especially in regions where polygamy remains socially embedded, but it signals a clear stance from the Vatican. For Catholics worldwide, the ideal marriage remains one man, one woman bound in faithful lifelong union. And that's all we have on the news on Papyrus Global TV. I am Christiana Babayo. Thanks for joining us.